Good morning and welcome to the Workforce Observer. We are so pleased to have with us today Christian Ulstrup. He is helping clients accelerate their progress on goals using AI as a primary catalyst. These clients are in the public sector, civilian, in private equity, venture capital, small proprietorships, and in the staffing industry. Welcome, Christian. Thank you for being here. So one of the things I wanted to ask you was about demystifying AI for the staffing industry. And I know that's a big ask. So, but what is going on with ChatGPT, LLMs, RAG, and anything else you feel we should know?
That's a great question. Big question. I think one of the things that I like to start some of my working sessions with and introduce people who are new to the technology to AI, or sort of this generation of AI, which is come to be called generative AI, is that it's neither something totally brand new, but it also is something that's new, right? So it's kind of in the middle. And what I mean by that is we've had computers for decades, right? From mainframes, personal computers, mobile devices. And I think a useful comparison is between a tool like a ChatGPT or a Claude and something like Microsoft Excel, right? So everyone's used to using Excel at work to crunch numbers. Yes. Computers, where things are different now is computers are capable of now crunching words. So through a ChatGPT or a Claude or one of these large language model powered tools, where you have a chat interface and you can speak conversationally with your computer, whereas before it had to be in really highly specified, kind of hard to understand terms, either through programming or creating functions or whatever the case may be. You can now just speak naturally to your computer, and it can process that information in a way that it can be made useful to you. So long story short, computers used to only be able to crunch numbers. Now they can crunch words, and you can use tools like ChatGPT, sort of like you can with Excel, to do a really wide variety of things that were previously impossible.
So give me some examples of what you consider generative AI.
Yeah, so generative AI, I think the two tools to probably pay the closest attention to, with which people are probably familiar, are ChatGPT, like you mentioned, and they now have an incredible brand, right? And really broad distribution, hundreds of millions of active users around the world. That's from OpenAI. And then there's Claude.ai, which is from Anthropic, which is sort of a competitive lab to OpenAI. So you can kind of think of them as Coke and Pepsi a little bit. Yeah, those would be the two.
Okay. You want to talk about RAG a little bit?
Yeah. Sure. RAG, sure. So RAG stands for Retrieval Augmented Generation. And that's just a fancy way of saying essentially doing the same thing as cutting and pasting text into a prompt. Just to kind of tee this up a little bit, one failure case that I've noticed pretty consistently when people use these tools for the first time is that, because it looks like Google, so you have kind of this text entry box, right? And you have some text or whatever you're getting back. Oftentimes the first inclination is to treat it like you would a search engine, like a Google or a Bing or whatever else. And the way we've been trained to use that is to provide very short queries and expect to get back some documents that you go deeper into. Actually, it takes a little bit of practice, but you want to change the way that you're thinking about interacting with these generative AI tools and adopt a sort of a tactic of more is more. And what that means is the more you put in, so not just a short query, but literally stuffing in as much relevant data as you possibly can, that'll increase the quality of the results that you get back. So if you say, come up with a meeting agenda or like talking points for an upcoming podcast I have with a guy who's an AI consultant or something like that, it'll give you something that's okay, but it'll be relatively generic. Whereas if instead you copied and pasted, my entire LinkedIn page, let's say you had found transcripts of previous podcasts that I've done, transcripts from private conversations that we had that, we've recorded and everything else. If you put all that information in, the system, whether it's ChatGPT or Claude or whatever else, will be able to give you a significantly higher quality answer, something that's a lot more personalized and precise, right? And so once you realize that's how the system works, like more is more, there's this technique called retrieval augmented generation, where you can actually have some of that go on in the background automatically. So if you plug the systems into your private data or point it towards sources of public data, YouTube videos, podcasts, there are lots of ways you could do this. You can have the tools automatically load the information that's relevant into its working memory, and then the quality of the answers goes up. So that's what retrieval augmented generation means. You retrieve relevant information, you load it in, and then you generate a higher quality response.
Well, that's super useful. Thank you. Is the staff and industry confused about AI? Do you have anything that you could share that tells us, or maybe even more, what is common in the elements that they're asking of you? Because you do help accelerate goals, right, using AI. So what is common? What are you seeing? Because I know you have industry clients.
Yes, absolutely. Okay. So I would say almost everybody is confused about AI. And for reasons that are really understandable. And I find this is commonly the case, for CEOs, especially of larger enterprises. And this is happening for a few different reasons. One is that we are truly in kind of, I mean, for me, it's very exciting, but we are in this sort of like frontier space where we have this general purpose technology. It's something that's quite rare. I like the analogy of electricity. I think there are a lot of similarities where that shows up. It doesn't integrate that well with existing factories, but then over time, over a period of decades, people figure out how to use it to do completely new things that were impossible, but it required a lot of experimentation, and it wasn't necessarily clear, as electricity was introduced, how it was going to be used. And so it's funny, actually, if you go back to the early 20th century, you'll see a lot of these really extreme assertions and sort of a lot of like speculative media that was popular at the time that paints, electricity is very like utopian or dystopian. I think with AI, with generative AI, there's kind of a similar thing where because it's so uncertain, people tend to gravitate toward the extreme. So you get, if you're a CEO at an enterprise, you're getting a lot of pressure from board members, employees, any stakeholder you can think of to figure out what to do about this, right? The voices that are going to get a lot of attention are either the extreme utopians. This is going to change everything, and it's really good, and we're going to merge with the machines, or what, however crazy you want to take it, or very dystopian, which is all the no more jobs and so on and so forth, right? And those kinds of things get a lot of attention, but the truth is it's actually really complex, and the only way to figure out the way the technology can be made useful to your employees so they can serve their customers better. And this is true for all industries, but I'll go into staffing and recruiting in just a second, is to actually kind of come back to the middle and somehow figure out how to catalyze experimentation and what's called user-led innovation within your particular institution. And so without having those ongoing experiments where people are just trying things with these general purpose tools, it's hard, if not impossible, to really figure out, what this is going to mean for your business. And a lot of enterprises, many are experimenting, but it's still kind of early days. And that I think is at the root of a lot of the confusion. Now, in the staffing and recruiting industry, what's interesting is I think that there definitely has been quite a bit of uptake. I think that there is some skepticism for reasons, again, that are totally understandable around the tech, where, if you're a very talented recruiter, let's say, you're likely to get a lot of energy from building relationships, from getting to know people. It may not be that interesting to you to, write code or do things that would be considered techie, previously, right? But what I found in practice is super interesting and not intuitive until you start experimenting, is that if you use AI in your workflow, in sort of the right way, where you start to delegate the tasks that need to get done, you know how to do, but you don't find super energizing, and creating like application or applicant tracking system notes based on a meeting transcript or something like this is a really good example. But all those clerical and administrative tasks, those are the things that you can use AI for in a sort of staffing and recruiting capacity. And once you do that, qualitatively, what I've seen is energy levels go up. People have more sort of time and attention that they can invest into building deeper relationships.
Right.
And so what that means is I think there's a lot of understandable confusion, skepticism and so on and so forth. But if people do have the right tools and training to start experimenting, what you'll find is the technology is, for the most part, very complementary and not something that's going to substitute human judgment and relationship building. And I think the things that, make us human, but also give people in the industry a lot of energy.
That's a very neat answer. Thank you. I know that you helped a staffing company recently. Without going into specifics, can you give us how you did this, like a kind of a mini case study? Like
Yes.
What was it? How it helped?
Yes. So this was so the one we had talked about previously. This one was super interesting for a bunch of different reasons, because it ended up going. It has a lot of characteristics that I think apply certainly to other companies in the space, but also much more broadly. And so let me just tell it kind of soup to nuts what happened. So we started off doing some exploration, trying to figure out, okay, what could this technology be made to do, like for the recruiters, given what the CEO's strategic objectives were, but then what the recruiters were already doing. And that always ends up being, these are the two things I've found that you need to keep in mind are, what are the strategic objectives of the business, completely independent of the tech, right? Like, don't get distracted by the tech. It's always a means to an end. But also figuring out, okay, with that being a guiding principle, maybe it's growth, maybe you're trying to boost NPS. Like, there are different things that you can have in mind. Figuring out how to arm those people who are making contact with customers, ideally, or candidates, clients and candidates in the case of the staffing industry, and give them access to the general purpose tools and teach them just enough that they can start running these experiments on their own without really being told what to do or how to do it. Okay, so what happened was I sort of shared some general guidelines. Here are some ways you can think about the tech. Here are ways it might be useful from other industries, other cases. And this was like a 2-hour working session that we did. First half was didactic. Second half was, okay, let's get a little hands-on and take something from your workflow that, again, met these criteria, things that you know how to do, don't necessarily want to do, but need to get done. Okay. And see if we can use generative AI in real time to demonstrate that there's a there and get people excited. And so at the very first session, and I encourage anybody who's like an evangelist for the technology, who's, you're that person at the company who's just been doing it, really excited about ChatGPT, you love the tech and whatever else. I found what I'm about to describe to be like one of the best ways to introduce folks to it who maybe aren't quite as interested as you are. And that's to go after some low hanging piece of fruit, where it's something that would have taken them X number of minutes, and then you can reduce that by an order of magnitude. So something that took 20 minutes takes 2 minutes, right? Something that took 2 hours now takes, 10 to 12 minutes, like whatever the case may be. You want to aim for those things, because once people have that magic moment, they realize, oh, like things are now possible that were impossible before. I'm going to be curious about the other ways in which I can experiment. And then they're motivated to do some of that on their own. Okay. So what we did was we ended up taking a whole bunch of unstructured text. So interview notes, resume, lots and lots of internal documents and sort of, like I said, unstructured notes about a particular candidate, and then combining that with some op-ed from the recruiter, turn that into at least a first draft of something that they could send to the client and say, hey, given the criteria, given sort of what you were asking for, here's what we found, here's what we think, whatever else. And now, we didn't put this on full auto. I would highly, highly recommend not putting any of this stuff on full auto. and certainly for the foreseeable future. But what happened in that case was, instead of them having to go back and retrieve and sort of synthesize all that information, we used GPT-4 at the time to create like a first draft of that communication. And then they, applied some sort of oversight, said, yep, this is all correct in terms of the info, because the recruiter was familiar with all the primary source documents, put some finishing touches on it, and send it off. All right, so that was the first step. And then what happened was, over the course of about, I think it was 6 to 8 weeks, we ended up meeting up and finding other slices of the recruiter's workflow. It started with one person who was excited about the tech, and armed them with some of the general purpose tools, including a meeting note taker. So we can talk about this, but one of the things that I've come to deeply believe that can be a little bit tricky, but is becoming a little bit more accepted and more of a norm, is by default, you should be recording everything. You should record all of your meetings if you can, internal, external, everything else, because the economic complement to this like commoditized machine intelligence, or AI, is data that you have access to that is really rich, is really high fidelity, that you can provide to the system as context for it to do the things that you want. So in practice with the recruiters, they started using the meeting note takers that show up to Google Meet, Zoom, whatever else. You get the transcripts, and then they started taking that and putting it into a custom application that we had built, which is really almost like a streamlined version of what you can do with ChatGPT or Claude, these different general purpose tools. And they would just copy and paste all that in, boom, hit go, get some ATS notes that they could put into the system. And we found just a bunch of different clerical sort of administrative tasks like that we automated over the course of those weeks. They continued to use the application. And I, of course, used AI to help me write the code to build the thing, because I had never deployed a web app before. So that's something interesting as well, is you can certainly expand the scope of what you think you can do when it comes to knowledge work, and just ask AI how to do it, and it'll tell you. So sort of an interesting aside. But we did this iteratively until by the end of the engagement, I asked from 0 to 5, 5 being, in terms of like a pain scale, 0 is no pain, 5 is a lot of pain. If I took this capability away from you now, how would you feel? And it was 5s all around, right? Which I think just speaks to how valuable the technology can be when you use it in such a way that it can handle all these clerical and administrative tasks, and allow you, as somebody who's an expert recruiter who, again, gets a lot of energy from building relationships and finding that right fit for the client, just frees up tons and tons of time, so you can invest that into providing more value than maybe would have even been possible before. So that's what we ended up doing.
That's great. Thank you. You did mention that you built an application.
Yeah.
Which was it specifically for this company, or is this something that you had? I wasn't clear. I was a bit.
Yeah, it was specifically for this company. So that's something that's kind of interesting. I don't know how relevant for your audience, but if there's a single person, so if you look at traditionally, software has been very expensive to build, which is why without naming names, like, I know there are certain, popular like systems that everybody uses, software sort of in the industry, that doesn't have the greatest user experience, right? People use it because it works and it gets the job done, but they don't necessarily love it. And so one of the things that's quite interesting about the large language models is they're not only good at processing and generating verbal text, right? So like generating a summary of a meeting or a document or something like that, but also producing code. And what that means in practice is if you verbally articulate, just like if you're a product manager, and I was a product manager previously to a cross-functional team, what it is you want, why, maybe you start to give specifications, whatever else. These systems are getting better and better and better at actually producing code that will work. And so the cost of producing custom, or I call it like artisanal software, is coming down. And what that means in practice is if you have one person who has basic coding chops at your company, they can actually make something that meets you entirely where you are, that is totally fitted to your workflow. So instead of having to fit everything that you're doing to this one size fits all software system, right, that's industry standard, you can now, if you have some of those somebody with those basic literacies, they can produce software that is fitted to you, and you can start to have the technology meet you where you are. And so this was a case where I was kind of shocked at how well it worked, to be honest. But there are a lot of other folks that are doing things like this that are building kind of this much more customized, software applications that plug into the AI systems, but are also built using AI. So that's definitely something to think about.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a coder, right? I'm in media, and I'm also looking. But I find that many people in the staffing industry, if they want to stay abreast of what is going on, right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter whether you're the CEO of a $10 million company or whether you're the CEO of a much larger company, or you're a recruiter or just people in the industry. If you want to stay abreast of developments, like businesses, how do you stay abreast of this? What are your options? What do you recommend?
It's a really good question. And this gets back to a little bit of the state of confusion that I think a lot of folks find themselves in. It's very hard to find the signal amongst a lot of noise. There are a few very concrete recommendations that I can make of sort of consistently high quality media that I would pay attention to in the space. The first one is by a Wharton professor named Ethan Mollick. And he has a Substack. He's active on a lot of different social channels, but he has a Substack newsletter called One Useful Thing. And I think he's one of absolutely the sharpest thinkers about, and especially coming from more like the business angle, like really thinking about what this technology can mean for your business. So that would be one thing that I would recommend. There are also some good AI podcasts as another medium, if you enjoy podcasts. On the more deep dive technical side, there's one called Cognitive Revolution that's quite good. And there's another one, I think it's just called I think it might just be called like the AI podcast or something like that that's in there. So those would be my general recommendations in terms of what to pay attention to. And I would say also too, anybody who claims to be an expert or is whether it's through like digital media or somebody who's speaking with you, I would try to get them to get to concrete examples as quickly as possible, because that's sort of makes it easy to know if there's like demonstrable expertise there that's going to be useful to you. So asking people to share examples, which if they've done it, they'll be able to. Is definitely something important to do in the space.
And I'm just curious, if I was the owner operator of a $10 million staffing company and I came to you and said, hey, I need an AI strategy, broadly, what would you say? I'm a staffing company, I'm making money, but do I need an AI strategy? If so, what should it be? Just, I meet you in the conference and I say, hey, what do you think? What should I do? What would you?
Yes, that's a fantastic question. I would you can get really incredible results in a very short period of time. I think if you take these 3 steps. So the first thing that I would do is get basically a company sponsored license for, I would say 2 general purpose tools that everybody can use if they want to. Now, telling everybody that they have to use AI, not a good idea. Telling everybody that they can't use AI, also not a good idea. But making the tools available to people in a way where you're making it easier for them to make good decisions and experiment and everything else, that's step one. One of the reasons why this is important is, whether you want to admit it or not, whether you're a $10 million company or a giant enterprise or like small, medium-sized business, your employees are using the technology. They're just not necessarily
Right.
telling you. And the problem with that is if they're using something, from their personal account or, whatever else, just like I said, because more is more, the people who are experimenting with this are figuring out that the more proprietary data, the more detail, the more high fidelity stuff you put into there, the better the responses are going to be, which means if you don't have something that's like company sponsored, there's a decent risk that proprietary material is leaving, company control and going into like people's personal accounts and things like that. So to mitigate the risk that happens, but also encourage the experimentation that could help unlock the insights that help you figure out, okay, what kind of deep and narrow bets do we want to make with the technology and help accelerate growth for the business or whatever you want to do, is to make, I would say, Claude Team. So Claude from Anthropic, all the model providers are always kind of like neck and neck, right? So this changes, but I will just say personally, I have found Claude to be have a slight edge in terms of like verbal tasks and sort of like verbal, like written, if you're doing reading and writing type stuff. So Claude Team account, which I believe is $30 per person per month. So get a set of team licenses.
You said team account, right?
Yeah, a team account.
Claude Team. Okay.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember so you end up spending, I think minimum spend is like a few $100 a month or something like that. But give a few licenses to, you can give it to everybody, but at least give it to a few people who, are maybe already have shown interest in the tech or something like that, right? So, a Claude Team account. The other general purpose tool that I think is super important is these meeting note takers. So there are a whole bunch of these. I would say my personal favorite is probably Fireflies. So fireflies.ai, because the quality of the transcripts is really high. They provide video and audio recordings as well, and they have a good kind of set of team management controls and things that you can use. But essentially, the reason why you want to have that is because you want to make it easy for the employees who are, let's say, using Claude to be able to take the content of, let's say, the meeting they just had and then do stuff with it, right? And it's everything from drafting follow-up emails 10 times faster to more interesting use cases around getting like coaching and feedback, right? So if you have guidelines and best practices about what constitutes a high quality interaction with a candidate or a client, or you have some sort of procedures, SOPs, policies, whatever it is, you can actually encode that into Claude, more or less, and then have as part of the process, instead of somebody debriefing with the manager, which may or may not be available, they can actually do kind of a debrief with the AI system and get better at interacting with clients. And so there are lots of interesting directions that you can take this combination of tools, but having the meeting note taker sort of recording capabilities, and then having the general purpose generative AI tools, and again, probably Fireflies and Claude Team, that would be the first step. The second step would be to start elevating the visibility of people who are experimenting the tools and figuring out interesting things, right? And a simple way to do this is if you have like, Microsoft Teams or, Slack channel or something like that, I would have a space where people can convene, they can share know-how, right, kind of remotely and asynchronously, but then also have somebody within the organization, and maybe it's one of these people who's just interested in doing this, take charge as kind of an evangelist or somebody who can convene other folks and start collecting and then publishing the results of some of these experiments that people are doing with the tech, just to continuously share it. As I mentioned, it's very complex. There are good practices, but I would argue that there are maybe not best practices. And the only way you're going to figure out what this technology means for your business is to have people run the experiments in a responsible way and share the fruit of those experiments in a public forum so you can continuously learn. Having like a weekly office hours or something like that is a good way to get that going as well. So that's the second step. And then the third step is once you've identified a number of people who are really, setting the pace when it comes to using the technology, they have figured out how to do things 10 times faster amongst a whole number of different dimensions. So, creating the meeting minutes, maybe they're figuring out new ways to prepare for client engagements. They're just doing new things that you weren't seeing before.
Yeah.
Figuring out how to convene those folks on something of a cross-functional team and setting a 1 month, 2 month, 3 month, quantitative goal where, you're really going to move the needle on something. You are going to go after some ambitious outcome when it comes to, total number of clients or candidates, let's say, move through the pipeline or, NPS score, whatever it is, but some kind of quantitative business outcome that's really important. The third step is once you have sufficient kind of momentum is to basically sign off on some kind of sprint where everyone is going to strive to use the technology to pursue this ambitious goal that wasn't necessarily possible before without the technology. And at that point, that's where the real transformation starts to happen, because people will then figure out how to achieve that goal that's maybe always been good for the business or its customers, but figure out brand new ways of doing it. And that's where things get very interesting. So those 3 steps.
That's great. And I don't know if this is what you meant, because you had talked about how staffing firms need to commit to radical reorganization when it comes to AI. Is this some of what you meant?
This is,
or is it something different?
Yes. So I think that this is definitely true for staffing companies. It's true more broadly. I think that one of the things that's important for executives to understand is that once you start integrating the tech into your business and people start using it, you should assume that a lot of the conventional approaches to doing things, and the clear example of this would be some kind of, especially big enterprises, you have these like very complicated processes when it comes to operations or whatever else. People will figure out ways to get things done where it maybe would have been a kind of convoluted 14-step process before. They can bring that output or that desired outcome to the present and bypass a whole bunch of stuff that had to be in place before, because we didn't have computers that could do reading and writing. You had to maybe rely on somebody else to do that, right?
Right.
And so understanding that bringing this technology into your organization, it will stimulate like more radical change. That's something you probably want to be proactive about instead of being reactive to, right? And the way to do that, to figure out the ways in which work can now get done in this sort of AI native way, you can get ahead of that by doing sort of what I outlined, where you arm somebody, you have the user-led innovation, you surface the insights or incentivize people to do so everyone can learn together. And then finally, have people figure out, what that reformation could look like through this kind of initial, like small scale experiment. And then from that point, it can become a little bit more clear, what scaling that out might look like.
That's great. Okay, I'm going to ask this because it would be crazy if I didn't.
Yes.
What do you see the future look like? The AI-driven landscape, the world of work. What kind of jobs would the industry, because you are familiar with the industry, have to staff? And I know it's a big question, but just broadly.
It's a really good question. I will say that I'm not a utopian by any means, but I am on net optimistic. I think that the technology is going to continue getting better and better. It did feel like there was maybe a little bit of a plateau over the past year or so.
Right.
Which I think even if that had ended up being the case, just because it sort of takes a while for the tech to propagate. Like I said, humans are the bottleneck in some sense, how these processes change and everything, it takes time. But it looks like actually there's been kind of a breakthrough from a technology perspective. OpenAI just put out some new technology, I think maybe even less than a week ago, where it really is sort of this big unlock in a new paradigm. And it looks like the underlying technology is going to continue improving at a really crazy rate. And so with that in mind, I think that there's going to be a lot of change. I think it's going to happen faster than probably any previous general purpose technology has affected change, simply because the updates, like the tech is as it's made available, is available to you at the speed of light. So it used to be, even in IT, you had to install servers, you had to do all this kind of stuff where there was like a lag between a discovery and something being made available to an end user. And now it's essentially instantaneous, right? And so with that in mind, I think people will continue to experiment. I think that the nature of how people get work done is likely to change quite a bit. And if you want to take a look actually at, I think, a company that was, a decade ahead of this, I think they were founded maybe 10 or 11 years ago. It's called GitLab, and they've been remote native since they were founded. They have an excellent resource on how to basically run like a remote native organization, very high, sort of employee NPS and all this kind of stuff. This is, well before COVID, right? And everybody had to figure it out. And I think that the things that they've learned are quite useful, because probably the primary effect of AI, which dovetails with other technology like the internet and some other information technology, is that work will become more remote. So people will not have to be physically together. And in fact, I would go so far as to say, as being physically co-located may put you at a disadvantage versus teams that are distributed, because they will be using AI natively. Why? Well, because so there are a few reasons. One is you have access to a larger talent pool, so you're not just like restricted to who's physically nearby. But there also is a weird way. This is something I've discovered just over the past year or so. I've done workshops in person and also remotely when I do like strategy sessions and things like that. And what's nice about doing it like in person, building relationships, like reality is the best medium in some sense. But if you want to get certain types of work done, what I found is doing it remotely, I will have pulled up like an AI co-pilot. I have all the, digital whiteboard, like all this information just available at hand, because all of our interactions and the live collaboration are being mediated, through these tools and through these interfaces where artificial intelligence is more and more integrated. You can just be significantly more productive. Like there are things that you can do that you can't do when you're in person, right? So you have this co-pilot, you have this, sort of second brain or second set of eyes that is in real time in some cases, affecting the nature of the work and how it's being done. Okay. The other, so remote for sure, asynchronous is going to be another big one. And this is going to be, I think this is going to be really tough for a lot of people. Somebody asked me this on LinkedIn. They were like, what do you think is going to be the fax machine of kind of this revolution, right? Like we think about fax machines as being sort of old school. And my response was meetings, actually. And so I think there will still be meetings. I think people will still be communicating live, in person, remotely, everything else. But the bar for quality in terms of what kind of meetings people will, be willing to take is going to be incredibly high, and it should be. And so any kind of meeting where it's just rote information, transfer, communication, whatever it is, we need to do a quick sync up, something like that. Probably, the organizations that are really figuring this out now and doing a good job is, instead of, bugging somebody or putting a meeting on the calendar for next week, you do something like record a Loom video in the moment. So Loom is a great tool where you can record your screen, you can talk to it, it creates a transcript. It's got all these great AI integrations now. And you send that to somebody for somebody to interact with and contend with and respond to on their own time, right? And so people are working remotely, but they're also working kind of, whenever they're available, even on complex knowledge work tasks. So remote, asynchronous, and then the third one is fractional. And so I think it's going to be more common that somebody has multiple employers in some sense, or
Yep.
maybe one main employer. This is kind of a pattern that I've seen become more frequent. You have sort of a main employer, and then you have a bunch of other kind of experiments or higher risk, like more frontier things that you're doing to get your own skills up, to become more of an expert, to kind of expand the scope of what you're doing. And so I think that remote, asynchronous, fractional, and then all of this really enabled by this AI mediated way of working. I think that's what you should anticipate and think about, given how your company operates currently. Do you have a lot of meetings? Are people in person? So on and so forth. Thinking about what would have to be true to start experimenting with this different way of working is probably worth some time and attention.
Yep, I'm not going to keep you longer, but there is this thing called culture, which people are worried about, because
Sure.
if everybody's remote and everybody's doing things on their own time, how do you build a culture? But I think that is the answer for maybe another day, because AI is great. Yes, you save time,
Yep.
but there is that culture component, which I think some CEOs or many CEOs are worried about, which is why the return to work, right? Many companies are mandating it now in terms of. But we will keep that for another time.
I'll give you sort of
maybe
one spicy take and prediction on that front. I think that I think the companies that do the RTO
Sure.
mandates will come to extremely painfully regret it. So we can we can talk about that maybe in the future. Yeah.
Well, thank you very, very much. Really enjoyed the conversation, learned a lot. It was wonderful. For those of you who want to learn more, the link will be in the description. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right. Thanks so much, Subhadra.